Yeah, that's not the email chain, it's, and it's. Working with, no, not really. Event was marijuana, the law produced standard for federal chambers, mandates advanced in federal law. That's a registration requirement. Body cannabis shares to the EU, Yali, 2021. Federal protection, not available cannabis shares. Other than BT laws, and some different chambers, these and the about federal government cannabis to the US chambers. Apart from chamber registration to obtain registration markers using carbon commerce with global and individual states. Legal from businesses not since such as the legal under federal laws and the science is administrative permitting regard. Never scheduled for marijuana, PCO adoption. Say activities numbers in 2018. Not far from chamber registration and allowed because excluding from marijuana, PCO to the guy marketing and person. No longer been US needs to welcome innovation by the adulteration, like a cross-border ship to stack like towards 20 growers in the US. The best marketing quality probably invited growers able to ship to other countries. More states that want the US and talk from jobs innovation, they wait for the extra work, living things more to see to good leaders, specific allowing the US industry means better quality innovation, world once they take the US innovation when it is more considered value over percent assured, products fit in on adultery, chamber security commercialization, product liability, this ambitious government 22 for US. Same just can together some flavor protection products and eligible. Normalization makes that we've been allowed to use all the protection and spiritual. Ready history of the burger what's very great time to see for regular will. Improvement as using as more market these converting out for a sort position. Now he's ability bring that bring shots bring which MC crosses out with these other company yourself together. Name by the NDCA and NDCA just both products. Many CPD remain eligible under NDCA therefore problems CPD sales condition versus either is much business place. Think of whatever ways that the trademarks law business utilize the other for advertising with my trademarks are right. Not just didn't work out customers in recognition, these choices that complete that active trademark application and canvas version. Remember to establish the app for international application for a platform to member of the countries that members. Remember the department trademark cities here the brand search on the brand. Driver these sales have been to the event and one exchange with other increasing present. Special issues of financial commercial or way for the time days or within cannabis so good. Name broke manufacturer access to all trademark shadows in this. Enable risks and bureau system litigation and place service of the like also gets another committee right version. More are levels than the investment of traditional sheets and number of US administration chambers. Commercial is another one. He said that no place with registration is legitimate parts with the administration proposal on these individuals for your rent. And establish these values in the Woodward as he showed the registrar. It's also a markers being 24 hour research. Next one, particular campus over revolution of ADR campus is available for fights against materials resistant to the city modular properties that ensure disabilities pressing side emission THC. Impacting on functioning of the proliferation and production. A marker is in fear pathogens extinction. Johnson's 22 growth as the single desk church represent country GPs are millions and exploration. Negative company the person was the performance engine pathogens discussed as direction. Barrel within the world and part of the future pathogens. It also causing barrel to overshoot extinction buffer. 20 weather versus have the bacteria and some products around your inputs and species disorders the beauty release. Increase the genetic elements and viruses from grow less white house condition was one reduction is the number of your response to both cycles and earth is more with the massive animal species. Reduce on your versus the earth total sugar production please out the by market 22 application of some years of business services. Management registration would allow you to make yourself be by market is the person as the chain or top on the sea levels or see something for the placing ready for which allowing companies ways of working for the versus versus 7 related. So much sugar is even though organization or registration will the campus like market fuel shines for this time. First of all, 24 times to come. Not only was smart one country registration about the differences. You're the white market or China, the white market item for the year 48%. North Chinese gap and was growing right. by the Chinese Democracy, power security to say Chinese conversation, common economy, when relation begins to go to for Chinese national government, driver company globally across the we government line for actors and doing comedy, China to be like the finance and giving a part of the world again. Government China's going to try to get the committee is trying to do war 10, maintain the efficiency these days of work resides in the world and the US and reinvested in the reside of the military above it. In the government nation, we have significant global also the USA, the recruiter plans for solid channel, cross border issues, clutter, when more than a year, federal trade relation with create the same governments that we were these access somebody getting capital, they would differentiate products and risk. Wrong set of clutter combination by the reputation by that are hard versus to discover production, the total to say, come to the economic stories, very competition by production, what do you say, special other cases, they were also very together. No say production and capital side of this part of the improving government components that are as federal currency as other countries say, the companies that are rich for as you go to expand this, therefore, yes, the commission reduce the law feature requirement in trademarks and issues of reach. People enforcement the law feature requirement under by 7 other existing enforcement regime. No paper permits they fight private cause action for laws under related trademarks because when you do law fees. And my team is strict over pro law side of the station violation of the law trademark laws 87. More recently, towards the session of the SUS, because this video can give reference video as this one. Investigation people that present and not by ignoring it, they should other video or just your way to enforce regime DOJ enforcement or marijuana based reason. States over investigation regulating the vital using or registration of the state of marijuana video or run. Permissive DOJ policy of office or warning regulated government action against this and not. Running president to video given that by more than person ever Welsh. Snarky one is the NDCA, they fight their private action. Chris back for enforcement other cities, the first day making a race at the video application of office. Make a line back the right worker cities to their private cause action, the NDCA. Names of private cause actions is very against the responder of law using an IP basis for registering. Whichever different cases is the one where office is in the FTC without machining what is not clear that guards drug sources, number 24 charge sources. Make up more on the US systems and worse to the negative also to avoid nothing so increases like company charge sources can get it and infection. No sort of coalition because it's more challenging sort of challenging for just probably by increasing production because they're like I got a short of especially for these campaigns by a short by we can let what was already secret the different money in place of party after we also get to show short ratio we want to act straight. Not good it's having to get ratio without this all wrong was our family different George and Marty Fox about the organization litigation train losses the organization litigation violation will have to make out the crowd and first reason that said no secret. Because actually whatever decision whether shop this litigation has the medicine that it causes the response for us. When we go this was one some partial questions the first issue or recording the drug which is represented. I suspect all this is that our practical guess is probably the same so I didn't rather be there was going. Only after when the drug alcohol medication and the medications have run out of the medication right. Patients which should be this for George due to the reason people unless we are like medicines and health will fail. Facing more lessons by Mrs. Maury, sharing how we cover the universe and by the return and return medicines and we cause the station bomb by 3. The national biological attachment to the events that response not made more than this and more opportunity. One's going to be over from the original state right now, but it's not as generally has to know because more important than the were sort of that makes sense. But my problem with the even if you're not investment of civilization about the road, we're studying the theory of result. Insufficient cognitive space because of very generally have your rest only though we try to go on. Also, the sugar that should 32 is interrelations cooperation, video cooperation is streamlined, well 16 should cover with the state innovation policy, effect work the mediation policy, but whatever for those context about I think border comes to the communication and the tax NDCA and IHD and the FTC operating space for the prevention cooperation for the words or for goals as well. It's also critical to existential risk mitigation to process when you're given it. There's a responsibility of communication the committees on traditionally against the national security efforts that not the SD we developed is important. Different ones more with innovation coordination or many other to agile and good response to the press people. This relation generation coordination is incredibly given points is very many kind of formats to move actually even though I'm very used to spend all the experience to give you an idea of the social current how we have the shame that the issue the presidential convention of the I thought it was fun about it. And I changed in years that's also the right change and trigger and the girl should be updated. State law for submission of video 16 chamber registration and I put in November 1 is because of the later points because the chamber made nothing about the reports discussion that actually also to reduce the law to get there. I see the regards of the federal chamber registration and constituted the constructive use of regards that nationwide priority important. Marijuana companies said that the chamber kind of say one that the market could allow that forget the 7 days jurisdiction and he said the market of nationwide tower produce out of farming says for taking rent on process federal. Well, yes, we know should permit registration.
So, correct my understanding, the plan doesn't legalize weed, but it creates an exemption within lawful use. So that weed can be legalized in.
No, it's something that's nothing to do with
I mean,
legalization.
excuse me, in trademark.
So it's not an exceptional lawful use, we think that reduce the eliminate lawful use requirement, thus they can do trademark, you're correct. So we do not legalize weed.
What is reduced mean? Like what other drugs or illicit drugs would you allow in trademark?
Well, anything, so let me just explain how the lawful use requirement works. If something is illegal under federal law, the PTO will not grant a trademark, or they will invalidate an existing trademark. We think that those things should be trademarked. So we think that the PTO, by eliminating the lawful use requirement, the PTO can, invalidate trademarks, they can stop granting trademarks on that basis.
Only is different from, like, is a little different from the word reduce. What's the difference? Would reduce functionally be
The plan is the complete elimination of the lawful use requirement.
complete elimination? Okay.
That's the normal means. We don't think our plan that like offsets the plan should.
Okay. Color evidence, I think that's the second card. It talks about US leading the world in innovation and then says that it might matter between states. Would the state of California that is able to trademark marijuana be able to sell that to a state like Georgia where legalized weed is illegal? I mean, weed is illegal.
Well, if weed is illegal in the state, then we cannot sell that weed.
Okay, I'm sure. And then, is there any benefits to interstate commerce over weed?
Well, we think that interstate commerce among like states that have it legalized is good, and the problem is that in the status quo, PPs can only get state trademarks, not federal trademarks. So they can't have like a universal protection of their like products.
Okay, and then the PTO doesn't plan, that's the option.
No, we think normal means probably Congress.
Normally is Congress, but then the PTO enforces it.
I mean, like the requirement is the PTOs, but Congress would eliminate their requirement. Because our evidence says that it's an administrative interpretation from the PTO that's not based in statute. So Congress would pass a bill or something that only makes that administrative interpretation.
Okay, understood. The rate evidence, I think that's what it's called. Just, I had a question before looking at it, but. No, I think I get it, because you're eliminating the lawful use requirement that would allow for like all like illegal drugs to be trademarked.
Like if they could get a trademark in the first place, if it's illegal under federal law, they can get it. But like an illegal drug wouldn't be able to be sold. Yeah, but some of them. The order is 6, then marijuana. 4. I cannot contest this statutory court HC action is enforcement of protection to shop at all 21. I first propose to the government to protection enforcement IPR protection police. This action is enforcement of the existing IPR law, subject to interpretation of the judiciary and other enforcement agency violations. They are Congress part of the limits of our provision. They exclude talking about most violent litigation that negative research by limiting core Congress basis that law. The mandate has the plan to reduce the lawful use requirement. All they have to be out is to make requirements smaller than fine law. No, they reduce to make smaller the blanket statement by the PTO, the executive agency controlled by Project 2025, which receives the plan along with the drug trademark. Chapter 4, the Project 25 is the next one. administration, how your drug policy and priority to just pressure to overdose, take on the drug trafficking, the summer slowly learn the U.S. government spreading drug use reducing availability, the list of drug FedEx, as all the old humanity stated. The banks of the BTO has to let 1 trademark. An example of the department that is act starts at 0.001% versus right about a plan NBA. The next off the state compliance counterpoint. The United States federal government should defer state authority when determining questions of the law, fees, and trademarks. Cannabis, all respecting state marijuana regulations. Maintain compliance with the laws of the state of deviation from those state laws. Cancellation of the registration amendment. As the MPs violation of federal law, some CSA prohibition consideration UD. Unlawful use capital piece of growth state laws. Otherwise, no secret any compliance with state laws against compliance with state laws. Against federal registration of every other requirement. Remove the result of our state law. That's first off, by those who have been affected by partnerships can ask all 15. Robert Federal no evidence solution law states can have a law to say that actually go partnership with all I don't even remember state cooperative agreement that only let's say lock up the marijuana. Federal state partnerships are crucial to responding to climate change, but you see, OT 21, the federal state partnerships that not cooperative should be pending. Even more new balance is critical for future environmental provisions and sector are to the sites that the different relations should be pending and the state of not function cause rise to the quality of environmental costs and environmental warming constitution and NG19 that the global should be environmental non-linear cascading price positive global factors critical to should be both IT classes positive over to I see the giant force or release mechanism for overall that positive environment adapted to the function even as global warming exposed each other and inhabitable making station one for less than estimated by model unreliable and stocks consortium have been 50 United States and all relevant consortium is African fish trademark consortium have been solved increased exclusive rights and simple potential between states and fish dispute that settled without any question on state rights Jacobs subpoenaed representation chairman social administrator the only chair the registration committee presumption express state law has marijuana was to registration other different other state more aspect to the bill artificial registration requires good registration probably sometimes senior rights to use private implementation the plan to create a lot of litigation between committee current state and trademark that showing that she was current case Jacob 17 again the issue that's been on trademark student local physically running early to raise the senior rights of the Catholic government make other registration available use of the daily competition comparing the determination rights use of last limitation medical ranges optimization now requires a portion of the new bureaucratic person on artificial does more than highly special dispute resolution the system of the low speed and short property in public database the affordable dispute resolution next office actual policy the United States government should not have to by reconciliation go but a bunch of Congress now Trump scheme law 410 the Trump the ones that goes down to the office Robin finalize the right where they must include no figure right into them the tax that's why has to go to the basic public laws momentum jump on them on cars really bad the IP reform question the gender version lovely that like the statute many persons she did versus the possible legislation I included no political capital the question after the new I just was bad from the bad from my father has been taken care of early to decide like vote this should not apply by box and or as taken up your voters but passive by the ship building response key for that now 100 billion defense rise industry basic critical nation expansion building capacity building restoring to that suit Taiwan invasion policy for that if the down the invasion can have that NDCA is efficient for US Navy with me this Taiwan all but certain the economic service waiting to achieve the Chinese name in situation the shape of the large constitution that people would join the SES the often desire that Taiwan the great great US security the anti-humanity 1820 that seeing Taiwan the RC the spirit influence making American less nuclear office these are control with the South Korean about nuclear both my Chinese nation the government it's the reports of the world here next thing the vice president box good phrase practically China about data last casting up to by wise European country opening by policies it's easy to rather spend time but I got this new network of box governments finally to control the world case one no AMR impact new breakthroughs and research office systems done but you know we're trying AMR would help disease by making better one with human again research found with nuclear AMR system the and everything but that job service capabilities completely new way think of the returning system which is using chemicals to spread information versus promoting team will play work involving inhibitors DHB inhibitors operate new industry prices diseases and no reason there's no reason why black markets feed the Chinese oak ground the complaints also oak ground organization will just trade it just makes it easier for them to run 3 Chinese oak grounds in free fall and alcohol time for video very violent crimes that was close to that China just one of the lowest crimes and has a security prosecuting violent it was a pretty drop from 25 19 I had the place that there's no solve to the play they cannot solve weed innovation it's still illegal most play in face interstate commerce and possible overreach One Trump is a massive road block healthcare and disease prevention. 124. Trump announced County was big DHHS. The ACNCA CCC with the broad list of work presenting nation vaccine guidance consistent with updated HC class. I'll share the discussion of the administration. Put the advice sharing with any person trying to advance on the MMW, but customer sharing local health department effectively. Local sustainable literacy. As a 7% of safety funds of administration, but it's about during HC with all infectious disease conditions with cost lives. And the FDCA highlighted quote the next line of the course rejected it, upholding the FDCA wanted to rate 77 questions of lawful use document the act of independent, lawfully use the court rejected this argument that removed the lawful use requirement to FDCA, Strauss can the FDCA Act as one of the FDCA Act held that each of the requirements to comply with they do not require lawfully cannot be enforced to determine unlawful use not required new federal statute and implemented by emphasize that from the road and CFC authority by NUSPTO created any of the statutes determining lawful use of remedies. That's question this for COVID disease approved there's no impact. 5. No existential impact. Taylor 22. And that's alone not constitution of the existential risk. Then alone on the begins to communicate survive the many places last minute. The fact was hope and some groups of gas and some groups be remain unaffected. Some groups had that of one sanitation practice. Greater attention to the medicine revolution to the medicine widespread impact to mitigate terminal spread. And so all see the agency cooperation. The entire article about the cooperation about patents. Here's the conclusion. One see the law 16. Then about patents problematic David innovation competition. Public agency policies. All kinds of any time that public as far as no IP even if the applicant is USPTO actually does not solve the diplomatic and military agency that is about that's inserted for reference below. Reject wants that there's no companion internally to any snare to class. The 3C class means you get the block your answers. Go back to Russian data. Russian ops have a drop by 90% daily 15% of the public fails the Russian export drop by 90% of the due to sanctions of the Trump pushing government data show controversy in the face of the fact that international Moscow pushing defense project law for usage to ensure Turkish comply with sanctions. No one seeing across so too after the primary Russian arms manufacturer law here. The United States of engaging on creation risk violation kind of put vehicle good use and US law peace requirement constance ground for every supervision law use to be investigated and a violation of the IECPA along state law to arms sales like Russian expansion economy and spend 17 Russian policy with arms for providing foreign policy Russian strong hold the arms international affairs arms export pushing the victory war the international urban find influence over the military laws that can move the Russia and expand beyond national structure for additional marketing. Expecting to see Russia for the influence of underlying Russia should expand actually go simple beyond concerned extinction rates. I think the international relations between Russia and US are less confident involved in the war to right accident to involved in the war. The US are about expansion of the health and international laws open data includes military dependent on new weapons.
Okay, is everything conditional?
That is totally
Okay, the state compliance counterclaim. So your internal link says that cooperative federalism is when the states are allowed to opt out. How is that the counterclaim?
plus.
Like they're able to apply an authorization.
How is that cooperative federalism?
Because
The counterclaim first.
they would respect. Like
Well,
cooperative.
I understand cooperative federalism is the state and federal governments like working together, we get equal claims. It seems like the counterclaim makes it so that the federal government always defers to the states.
It's not that, it's like right now there's a top down regulation, the federal regulation of the law they use that they think it prevents it, but right now, the federal government would defer and allow states to do what type of.
Which card do you think says that deference in lawful use allows the states to do their own climate responses?
It would still.
Which card says that?
The internal link card talks about why cooperative, like allowing, like the thing you were talking about.
The internal link card is a definition of what cooperative federalism is.
Yeah,
It
so-
does not say anything about scope.
Well, we think that it says that partnership solving problems jointly allows cooperative agreements. Those agreements be a set of key climate policy.
Okay. The consortium counterclaim, what is a cannabis trademark consortium?
The counterclaim would essentially create a consortium, which means that all the states would, or the first thing the counterclaim does would, the states would recognize each other's trademarks, which would create identical like federal, like the same type of federal protection the state can have. It also creates an arbitration mechanism, so any disputes would get solved on state levels, not federal levels. So that answers the question.
Okay, so it doesn't give federal trademarks.
It's not federal trademarks, but it allows brand recognition across states.
Okay, sure. Politics aside, is the bill Trump or John, like is Trump speaking or Johnson speaking need the bill passed?
We think it's probably Trump, but it could be a little bit.
The Blue Arrow card says they have optimism over finishing the draft. Where do you think it says that they are going to get the bill passed?
We think that, like, the card talks about why Republican leaders are intending to finalize the vote soon, by the Memorial Day process. Is that
Yeah,
it?
not unless like the draft of the bill. Where does it say they're going to get that passed?
Yeah, well, we think the block can be cards on this, but we think that that signals that the bill is going to be passed.
Why?
If they can get, like, the bottom part of the card, or part above that talks about why there's optimism that they will follow.
Okay, the Russia does that? How does lawful use prevent Russia from getting arms?
That's not our argument. Our argument is that the trademarks would comply with the sanctions against us.
Yeah,
Like, how does that happen?
wait, trademarks stop them from getting arms?
Yeah.
No, like that.
Gonna be marijuana thing. Everything. Like prevention. Enforcement kind of plan. The, like, the rural kind of plan. They can plan kind of. The lawful use good, or the Russia just had. Then call it. One, research does not solve any bar to hide and map, which are marked over kind of key to ensure that there's breed innovation, which is a specific field or not required topic is good time notifications that are only enough to solve any more questions that are coming in the future. By the way, that this principle the impact of hydro low concentration is a high scale threat that is designed to get around all medication and efforts that is growing because they're planet tags. The concentration 1 C2 is black market. No, or O'Connor CR, the topic specifically says that O'Connor marijuana market. So the key factors that are funneling O'Connor back to Asia that are causing instability in the market. Their evidence just says that what is the research that O'Connor is down now? It's just about drunk driving in China. That's not about overall stability and O'Connor groups that are all throughout Asia and causing instability in the region. You can see the impact that Asian instability causes nuclear escalation because countries are uninhibited with nuclear weapons, with North Korea, China, US, etc., which all goes nuclear. That's saying that in 2024, we do stall, but it doesn't have to be illegal because now trademarks ensure that they can hold they can hold companies in other states who are accountable for infringing on their product, which is key to commercialize their products. Once you want Trump's thoughts, to stop disease response, the evidence is found the CDC, but that's not what's in their mouth. So our private litigation efforts who are trying to develop drugs on the private level, those only the absolute by ensuring that the local use center doesn't act as a barrier for infinite litigation against those companies to this way of litigation, to this way of innovation, not only improving as soon as allows them to, and do it without fear getting hit by a multitude of lawsuits that to more evidence is relevant by the CDC, because we still provide all the drugs. What we do is that the term, this is completely incoherent. The one thing that we had was that in a specific case, of course,
rejecting the argument that Clark then goes on to say that in numerous other cases they allow the lawful use requirement to reject, to be a gateway for, lawsuits under the NDCA, which causes their impact. Once the instructor of the lawful use of FCCA says absolutely nothing. It's an ad specifically says a lawful use litigation under the FCCA would cause innovation to get caught up in infinite litigation, which is what this scenario is about. Then you just read more ad parts. Once you agree that that code dumps, no, it doesn't. Our business government says it's more likely because of globalization than animals. Once you board of disease attack, yes, it is. Disease will have a fundamentally value because of evolving mutations. Then it causes the side of collapse with the flashing collapse and reversal of geometry, which causes knock-on effects like unconstant that's bottom. Once you have that, BTO co-op is wrong, and it's irrelevant, and it's not about just finance, about broad and emission policy, and back away when it's slow because BTO overreach covers every single area, including finance. Once it states that, as far as vague outside, it's just about instant impact or about intelligence capabilities, BTO, that policies can incorporate with other agencies. Once it's evidence that, unless it's so bad, there are obvious specific scenarios that all agencies should really impact the advance of the T. We meet where Congress. Second mention. No assumption take out. One means that the entire lawful use is revealed. Two, we saw reductions in numbers of receipt. Your bad marijuana marks and limited BTO. Three, reduction includes elimination. News go 9. To reduce and include elimination of receipts. 4, there won't be a loss. Otherwise, every environment that loses the chunks of events. 5, there to increase reduction needs to make smaller. It includes making smaller by eliminating. Consortium kind of thing. Once you vote to see this law, once you vote to solve it, government will cover every state for sure without having resources well, only issuing a fraction of the benefit that's Dickinson divided under proposed standards to ensure registration efforts. That's kind of is collapsing the industry, that's Dickinson to be preempted states themselves, is that their own traffic enforcement is worthless and superseded by federal statute, exacerbated by search costs. Then limit remedies, that's Dickinson, USPTO ignores all day and enforcement in case every term link, 10 and 19, that's uncredited, and then request state law to be eligible for German registration. This will allow without local laws, USPTO goes like, no requirement of law, only laws, your registration, marijuana, subject to ski. Stated is keeping the just getting examiners to consider the agency of responsible use of the USPTO policies based on the authority to read where agency rules without strikedown to the compound capital in the United States is the federal government, which is the text law board of command and the compound. First USPTO to revive the lawful use, which means that every benefit or case office speakers then copy with the federal government contract and the interest case litigation applications. Then increase now with language uses done by decreasing uncertainty in federal courts and federal registration. That's garbage. Different government. Or if the if the girl's the same thing as removing the lawful use standard, then it's always just a plan, cheaper to vote, it just looks like, yeah, it's an approach to the case. 3 can solve a lawful use doctrine and doesn't remove at the PT level, which means that federal trademark registration still doesn't work, which means only classified all answers for above the uncertainty. If the PTO doesn't actually reveal it wholesale, trademark registrations will be sure that they can apply for trademarks to the USPTO, which is ad hoc reasoning for every single trademark application that it might be removed, which is not sufficient. See it over, so the PTO just remove them, and the PTO doesn't remove it, then they're still going to apply the lawful use standard in every other area, like the NDCA, which causes infinite litigation that determines innovation. 4, primarily the issues of laws. Because numbers are marijuana by doing it and lawful use is key. That's good because counterparts can be technically functioning. The competitive, that's the underground opportunity. And tremendous. And 5, unknown internal weight and slowness in one of marijuana does not cause common partnerships broadly. Back of dogs, counting on good part of the state. Over climate policy, but see and climate is constitution of 20 degrees. That's your message of a climate. Then to get forward of address, kind of more complicated than actually human influence of the changes to create effect. Don't be holding it as climate has some increases that the aspects of are always applying when we found compensations whether human just have to plan 10% of their threats as she's growing still stress and single rate as to remain markedly outline very live adaptable. It's mass species diversification and how to convert it all when James talks about in the duration part of includes and be true great example. Can't be all days are imagined big contradictions that to put on how to prevent that using answers copies PA. Regression. One, the link is very good, and I'm a USPTO. Historically, the requirement numerous times to arbitrary carbon, so exacerbated uncertainty that's because these similar cases, I mean, the past criminal ID is inevitable, check by government, innovation, because trying to the lobbies, unnecessary integrity, PTO was limited possible, even the company for assets, no words, the just not become a published word, and combined, definitely allow our coverage of the cases that is on Mark 5, Supreme Court's best integrity of this, registration not considered for Mark 2, terrible use, I post it, there's a purpose, the adjudicators, and the expertise of what actually unlawful support outcomes, these are straightforward policy, but it's being complied with him and then the examiner is no longer worried about these because everybody could bring matter to the agency attack 3 no link if that's actually legal, but then the above no reporting other agencies lawful. Respecting the authority that's because born and also now that it 25 and the initial more rational next because I've already born in 2021 and I can present them as significant factor of distribution which for the best of this needs as our wishes and now companies other more words in the Ukrainian and average for 50% of Euro 2020 even 2018 higher interest rates after the market impact of Euro and the manufacturer created these kinds of customers sort of the PRC 5 kids locates all in the US then made the ship out of Europe 6 so I charge the key of getting this order particularly told the government stuff the nuclear locust and obviously the whole NSO vessel to address over ship 7 the war use of truth that through that also having their episodes in here because it's inevitable because their episodes pre-Ukraine is already invaded. On states and consortium campaign, consortium campaign, instead benefit, if states are implementing trademarks, they're obviously gonna be backlash by Congress. In the compliance campaign, it includes the USFG and causes them to defer, which all means to benefit, it basically says, yeah, politics. Currently bill is solved, but either way, the ban doesn't solve, Trump will circumvent the ban on the bill and have the new one that does the exact same thing, but the one and one pass, and he held 331, the House signing against the Judy Sun, turning to like, but against, she will forward, city board records down, massive problem, because this against our reconciliation, how she use majority, our relation, nothing in the entire problems on the sentence, over the roads, the national sense, no, which will be on and on board, two, Trump, NDCA failed, personal, so I think, unfortunately, for people, good thing down, would give his language status, membership, which is a goal, breaking from the vacant sworn in, natural passion, seeing what it is beyond, observe trust the idea of the Trump, with that, never work status, or long into reality, my God, no idea how to work power, is evident, and I'm sure from us, meaning is burning, or Trump, if he sees him, he can persuade any single Republican, 320 votes, if he gets an intrinsic logical law, plus you can give a 3 link, all uses in static policy, Congress, and now last year I was very because it doesn't affect budget, but either way, there's about patents, not trademarks, 5 reconciliations, not getting visible best, no, it's 25 reconciliation, just one of my consumer health, no, I think one us very slow, and get married to this legislation phase, 6 months of events will work, but if you're doing it, causes absurd or short, it's going to be, because if not, what's going to require, are you doing orders and extra numbers, but and principal events won't work if longer, so we can introduce the building number, never perfect distance survival, showing us as being more challenges, no, this is the same hunter, so I guess to do that, target single, this as a game, actually has increased levels with any your arms.
So you're saying no.
From that's.
I'm good to start process.
Yeah.
What was the least that benefit argument for consortium?
If states are just like basically doing all the planning, Congress will backlash, right, like they hate marijuana policy. They'll obviously get mad at states, there'll be political.
So this is the links to
states
policy.
that keep it.
This is the links to policy.
Makes it happen, like,
How does it link to
all to the internal, there was no internal consortium, unless it was like a board club.
Yeah, sure. I want to talk about the preemption argument. Can you explain it?
Right, yeah, it's federal, like the marijuana is currently illegal under federal statutes, IP laws that'll give driver's registrations, but a federal law, if states are to implement this and allow marijuana to be legally trademarked, this federal government will preempt that, because it's illegal under federal statute.
Okay, sure. The reasons to reject this is condo.
Yeah.
And it was this way.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. You said on politics that you're an agency, law use is an executive policy.
Yeah, it's an executive policy, you can
Carried out by Congress.
yes, the possibility to remove that, but they wouldn't backlash it, I mean, PTO policy.
Okay, we've read it, link about like IP taking.
You read a link about patents,
It's actually IP, it says patents are an example of it, but the first part talks about IP.
it's about that.
It-
But
The first part literally says IP, for example, patent.
Okay.
So why does that build?
The lawful use standard is tiny, it's a PTO interpretation of a statute, Congress isn't gonna go like haywire over one tiny interpretation. Especially when your evidence is about trademarks, no one cares about trademarks, like, no one.
Sure, I want to talk about the state compliance counterplan and uncertainty deficit. What is the impact of this?
No investment takes out any investment into the marijuana industry,
Okay, if it still results in protections, why is that not solid?
because they're not sure that they'll get protection. Well, it's like, if it's an ad hoc basis, that the USFG is gonna defer to states on every issue, like, unless it's a whole
Why?
repeal. Like,
Like, is that more ad hoc?
Like, because the plan is just a straight up repeal of the lawful use standard. The counter plan is just like, oh, on each trademark, we'll defer to whatever the state say. So the lawful use standard still exists, but then there's gonna be like, they're gonna change it for every single interpretation, of the trademark on registration.
Sure, the other issues, Brian, well, what that benefit you can solve?
The internal private partnerships, after the state.
Like what
The zero evidence about, partnerships that are lawful use of marijuana.
Like, that's not text, the first one would defer to states in all instances, and the second one defers to states and trademarks. We think both of those would be much broader deferral than kind of plan, which ultimately would get much better.
Okay. I want to talk about the circumvention argument. 2AC2 was that reduction is enough to revive marijuana marks. Is that any reduction is enough?
What do you think, any amount of ridiculous plan production, like, the normal needs elimination, which.
Okay, so that argument requires winning no.
No, well, one, we made a normal use argument, two, we defined the use normal.
Are we with 10?
It's 10.
So first the question of lawful use exemption two, state by state, two is the state by state basis that. So one is lawful use state with legalized marijuana can decide to remove the lawful use exemption on a federal level for people in the state. And turn the marijuana advantage, that's the state for rural cannabis get the upper hand registration for industry growth, that's the seller ultimately want federal and legal system recognizes the system of the urban system of the how the dispute result of all the legislation. Grant cannabis and Woodward cannabis illegal territory cannabis illegal state under it's our priority care so the companies that in accordance to tells PGA overreach is predicated off the DOT wanting to defer to state policies but prefer to kind of plan its first cooperative federalism through some sufficient combination of federal and state regulation. That's the chairman's key evidence that best one turns case only cooperative federalism to regulate marijuana while promoting growth federal overreach sex industry chairman's key 15 cooperative federalism framework for marijuana listed with enforcement and regulatory priorities to choosing for prohibition state must under drug enforcement of universities how about you federal priorities and centers enforcement of state of the level best pursuit experimentation. Two is forming federal state partnership to key to solve climate change first flexibility and innovation between federal and state governments relationships are all different now revitalizing anywhere for more cooperation. That's the way that not linear cascading effects feedback we potentially points ensure existential warming externally warming safety adaptability and limited ensure extinction that's the negative evidence first and first counterplan is ever strengthening protection that makes it easier to acquire IBD minerals 70 area decision and action was a part of the caused by strengthening weakening or being neutral to IBR the consistent with our research and strengthening reference takes in front prevention or to make it easier to acquire IBR the wrong discovery protection makes it easier to the decision that they are the effect of protection the verb that was the net strengthening IBD metal 17 with a given decision and weaken IBD was determined based on the effect of IBD laws with generation the hand on some of the based on this position of subject. So state may choose to restrict trademark registration for marijuana related fields. 17 applicants don't mention no registration of marijuana related fields like the number of obtain registration in connection with the cannabis goods. Next is term to the links to net benefits still impose a broad federal policy absent deferral to state government that next cooperative federalism, even if they defer in some instances the action of the limited government some states would destroy broader cooperation. That's the sure XCM and that's if the Devlin says they say we can't solve lawful use, but yes we can. It differs to state by state basis that goes above next to the uncertainty that it's not a federal. It's not federal, so there is inherent uncertainty. No, it's not because it's like we're mandated the plan and they have to push this out more to when it next to the overreach and we can't solve the PTO stuff, but that was above. We definitely saw the DOJ evidence to prove that, but even as it says, there are impacts of the disease impact is solved by innovation, which is on the first advantage. So which is the same internal link. So we definitely solved that. And the worst the federal government can't follow on with solve. I'm gonna preempt what you get here. One, there's no impact to this deficit. It's you and the 1 year I strike off the bows. Same accuracy often says value, but it doesn't say the word innovation once, but you apply sufficiency. Maybe we just need to win a risk of the net benefits and solvency, but the evidence is wrong. Every time I find higher cost when they sell something that much worse, and it doesn't take into account the kind of effects. So much due to sustained trademark litigation problem before links back on a huge difference between state and federal courts. They still take a bunch of time to litigate, which means litigation costs are inevitable, but owners are forced to enforce their trademarks and inevitably lost when you want. And actually, these innovations and trademarks that come from the genders, the law enforcement of evidence of the market trend, the determination of the escape from the enemy, and the legal action may import the legal action. Having some sort of a trademark progression for making trademark registration for the value next is other issues. The firm is functionally intrinsic. The rejected counterparts need only be functionally competitive and can never be able to plan or no essentially no next. Yeah, but one regressive business just by scramble parents across the account where the counterpart that's all the aims to determine that benefit skills for has to use logic pain and the other not competitive and serious ability to generate unique discipline. Real world testing plan is in the bill only function results in other way. No negative presumption because it gets tossed out functional alone ensures rigorous testing that benefits the assets. Either research and both the kind of the text that they say are massively good. Even the use the just asserts the authority in every instance, which it doesn't make it clear as to what authority in every instance, which is massively worse. It doesn't guarantee that they will definitely do it in lawful use, because inevitably they'll get confused, and the state governments all of a sudden become as good as the federal government, which is not what we're saying is good. Next, they say that they should, and both of them are massively vague. Next is the no spillover stuff, but yes, spillover. I say action across different debates and improve the board of federal overseas government, putting across the government officials on the business region government, the federal government, the state level intervention. The plan still leverage the overwhelming federal control governments, 15 monitoring federal states and the national government share responsibly in the temperature. Also, there are urban federal ability of self major regions, federal government self government, federal enforcement beginning on the regional adoption of federal revenue, urban federal government especially beginning of the federal government needs to be state intervention. Also, I guess an argument, the Trump argument, it was literally just the word Trump. I don't know how this conceptualized over so no school we're already gonna do. An impact argument that they have to re-explain this and want to go into the 1 hour, you get brand new answers in the 2 hour. And yes, that means definitely solve climate effective federal policy to mitigate climate change. Federal preemption destroys progress policy. 18 regulatory challenges here as a route of regions by reducing climate authority independent federal climate regulation to create more certainty and resilient weapons of regulation. Federal unity for preemptive regimes that are conducted process state that regulation as regulatory risks during times of federal state regulation and innovation remains important. These amendment typical climate representing federal climate agreement next is not it's good because we didn't want argument innovation. Public charge encouraging them the positions that are means of argument innovation under their chemistry and veracity and overlay best for students in the real world. These logical success is always a logical option that can show predictability directed for reaching. That's for no stats because adding more moving parts related to the marker good side and the three dimension rigor and kind of argue worse the more they are confirmed the theory speed cross collide. That's time stats to DX and vector and C and different speed. Then the next lights are bound is reactive and speed person last and the topic is super rapid. It's using their data unifying generics it's equal playing field. That's the key to depth question. That's to determine which argument is more than I check back and the time to collapse solve depth 11 reject argument the team can see reasonability on team is with bad or arbitrary no explore two months are often descriptive arguments because team will be afraid of the stricture the logical plus methodology choose go next move on. Regardless, D4 and climate change burns plans because all the strong teammates are to get our next MR. New research solves and hitting the purposes of the driving resistance capabilities of are to make it friendly preparation of this participatory simple analysis featuring our markers that's secondly. Green innovation have no reason why green innovation is uniquely key, so we still solve innovation and vaccine prevent existential president. 70 difference of bacteria vaccine drop 90% before and so the numbers of vaccine more vaccine the other than discussed about water pollution bleaching level because it provides vaccination also resistance to the bacteria overcome the ability affect the healthy adults I provide hospital patients and only clinical continue to provide food and water and is a biosphere stuff first. It's wrong because all of AMR defense definitely applies to it because it's still based off of AMRs and the matters and their solvency through being innovation, which is being solved now and still solves. AMR doesn't cause it. The changes in the performance strategies really try to be one of the better system or the public health antibiotic failure to import the macros of computer is not true that antibiotics in the world are as a little one that antibiotics are going to be effective at all. And then two antibiotics then. Yeah, and no, the one concept says ongoing research is exploring interaction potential of cannabis. He says a bunch of your cannabis like also bacteria, biofilm, and petrification. You know what else is not going to garlic, honey, ginger, organically, the love of God. Not trying to treat your bacterial infections garlic. They reburn the frequency of burning extraordinary until they read out and second chemistry and infections human training or do they put antibiotics and see how no and solveness and nonsensical. The crime stuff, even if they have straws on that distribution of marijuana, there's no internal into stopping imports because of criminals to do it. We're removing the lawful use requirement, shuts down the black market because there's no incentive to use it. Yeah, increasing marijuana trade is what is he going to show granted commander's production when he says mention performance exports would improvement they just say that it's key to the living but it won't go existentially no really like the legality of it so it doesn't matter overreach. Trump jumps to D's, it undermines disease prevention and future political interference for both electric community saying global health is relying on a essential public health program. That's why it comes to PTO solvency, but also when dropping their innovation thing just definitely doesn't solve it. And there is impact that ain't no impact features in black plague and influenza COVID improvements on international cooperative be alignment for disease and pandemic speed essential also Taylor AMR was answered their warrant here, but no PTO cooperation, AB NGCs and all causes of cooperation. They're internally about intel. They have no claim that PTO can solve that cooperation internally has to be holistic. Even if the PTO cooperating, that's a sense for evidence. But those are all causes of removing lawful use can't solve. They're currently about invalid paths and bringing innovation, reducing competition. Other agencies need to guess me. That's one of you about. Yep.
So does the app or does the app plan remove the lawful use standard?
It differs to statements.
So like on each trademark registration, they're gonna like decide if they're gonna apply it or not.
Sure, it depends on states. Like obviously Georgia thinks it's illegal, so they wouldn't allow that to happen.
So
But
in most
California
states,
would allow.
so in most states, it would like remain.
Excuse me?
In most states, like they would still use the lawful use standard.
For some of them, yes, it's up to them.
Okay, the PTO overreach that DOJ we highlight, what do you think it says?
Whatever.
Like for reference, that you said solved, like I don't understand, it's just about the DOJ and what they think, or do you think it says that referring states means the PTO removes the lawful use policy?
But by refusing registration of marks used by state licensed marijuana, the PTO undermines the premise of DOJ policy.
Yes. Exactly,
So,
the PTO's lawful use standard is what violates it.
Right.
Kind of plan does not remove the lawful use standard.
But
out of the law.
sure, that's the first part of the argument, but that sentence indicates that the DOJ was them stopping refusing registration of state licensed marijuana and state laws and undermining what the DOJ is acceptable. Like it says it's against DOJ laws.
I don't really think that, but sure. Does each state wholesale everyone is it on each trademark registration to decide if the lawful use applies, or is it just on each state every single trademark will be under the same standard? Like,
I
if
don't
it's in like California and they don't want the lawful use standard, would that apply to every trademark? Do they decide if the lawful use standard applies, like, based on each registration that happens?
Okay, so states with legalized marijuana, like California, can decide to remove the lawful use exemption on a federal level for like their federal trademark for people in their state.
Wait. So I don't know,
So
so
it applies-
am I saying, do they make that decision for each registration like individually? Or do they make one decision and that affects every single trademark?
I think normal means would be one decision for those trademarks in that state, if that makes sense.
Sure, and then they just get federal trademark protection.
It'd be up to them because the federal government would defer to them on the issue of lawful use.
Okay, I guess. The counterfeiting argument that like federal legalization is bad, where do you think this says that like the absent state deferral is positive? Because like presumably it's a federal statute, states also comply with it, it's just about federal trademark registration.
I'm sorry, did you repeat that?
There's other evidence, it just says that right now in the status quo, there are counterfeiting because there is no registration. Why does this assume like over the act where there's federal registration for trademark?
Well, I don't understand that argument as to why they can't solve it, like, I think what this other.
No, you said it's the term.
Oh, the marijuana, the other evidence, yeah.
Yeah.
So what they're saying is that, like, without state deferral, like. Counterfeiters will still get the upper hand because it is for, you know, it's about the states, all your evidence is about states. And in each, like, individual states wanting to trademark it, giving deferral to them is obviously better.
Second. What is the Russia DA? Politics DA? The consortium.
Did Russia follow?
Russia DNC, no internal link, no link, and no impact. It also takes out all offense, there's no offense in politics. They extend the counterfeit Trump, so Trump cannot circumvent it because of durable fiat. The counterfeit durable fiat, no member of the USFG will pass. The plan also can see that the parliament blocks it and that laws compulsory mayor can do both. It takes out any offense, the control counterfeit. You both links in that benefit determined by the flood of litigation on the federal level created by the plan, and the inclusion of the plan also causes that flood of litigation too, and link this next argument was does also the counterpart obviously solves has states created state trademark social that one has legalized states explicitly allow trademark registration for cannabis with presumptions of exclusive rights to those marks bearing federal protection too. It recognizes cannabis trademarks registered in other consortium states, allowing brand recognition and rights to extend across state lines. 3, it creates an arbitration system for permission resolution of trademark disputes. 4, respects existing state trademarks by not giving new registrations priority or marks already in use such as James that solves marijuana innovation by allowing the industry growth across state lines. Often solves scope the second part of the line state reference and therefore is bad because it creates a fraction of the protection that I just explained above. Why the counterpoint would mirror federal protection, the counterpoint would carry stronger rights. Mere federal protection, James Epstein, consider trademark registration to be a different premium patch evidence of ability of registered market, registration of market ownership of the market. Excuse for registration of commerce and career additionally bar from the impact of all odds of the business of the already should be higher enough for this consumer cost. If they actually need the protection at some cost, may will be outweighed by the protection because they're so good, but there's no quantifiable impact. Quantifiable impact still solves nothing for the link to turn out for the internal turn to outweigh the link to the turn means that Mark Holmes has to use more funds to litigate, which turns this argument they are predictable, but they are predictable standards. One, answer to the two and C. Two, the counterpoint still recognizes other state protections and mirrors federal protection which solves the unpredictable standards. It also links back in turn state regulations are inevitable. The counterpoint prevents federal encroachment which is unpredictable. James Gunn says state recognition of regulation issued by the understated both state regulatory responsibility adopt the same sort of provisions that owners with no license of granting constate marijuana restricting state content. Nimbus theory and residency the prohibiting cross distribution extent for the cannabis great responsibility joining consortium people the market of the Almighty license state by state maintain for the that's going to be the belief that government registration grants and run let's requirements they take preemption. No preemption but links back to them. The conduct does not regulate in the state commerce. It only has states reciprocally recognize trademarks within states, but it's easy to strike out or persons in the world of the act and status quo because the interstate legal commerce is still illegal federally. PTO ignorance is wrong. It does not assume the counterclaim. Internal arbitration mechanism themselves. That was above. Their evidence is to federal registration, not state. The counterclaim registration would still go through state registration mechanisms, but arbitration mechanisms solve any other disputes which obviates the need for the PTO. The state doesn't solve overreach. The counterclaim obviously solves because it obviates the need to rewrite agency rules. The deficit is predicated off the DOJ wanting to defer to state policy, which is not, which doesn't happen under the counterclaim. The next argument was due to counterclaim. Established USFG. There's the three branches of US legal aid, USFG, three branches, legislative, executive, and judiciary. The reject evidence is both fairness, classmates, act who we target allows every act to be the state's counterclaim, which also obviously stories on ground. The counterclaim text, the next part was about the counterclaim text saying the capital US, which this does not matter. One, no means solves. Obviously, I have to check the explanation of the counterclaim and minute details of that and misspelling always get mixed up, always happen and build. Crossfire the arguments about circumvention, normal means, and normal means solves. Two doesn't say the counterclaim text doesn't say federal government, which proves it's still the state because the states come before the United States. The word the 50 states come before United States. Three, they don't have definition, which means you should reject it. They say double line is wrong. There's no conflict with the federal government because the trademarks already exist. Two, there's no impact to this. Three, the part I read above answers this because it says that the states would create identical protection. They say no to case the plan fails, but the plan fails by creating flood litigation that attacks marijuana industry growth. The innovation which turns case moving lawful use requirement and lost years of unresolved trademark disputes will explode into litigation over priority concurrent use and infringement defense is ridiculous. It's obviously outweighing any existing cause because their evidence is that trademark holders could exist, but after they're rising now, appeals to find their courts of upholding lower court decisions assume their evidence baggage held 24 federal court decisions 300 cases in 20 outcome 22 the one outcome prepared and was found to upheld lower court certainty 80% time mark between the outcome and the appeals was 86% 23 much higher than 22 court approach the after often 22 the first reference card said that their application is not litigation. The last was the troll argument. The link far outweighs uniqueness and consortium substance above arbitration is more effective. That was also about the bank choice of the industry one litigation, federal preemption, geographic badge, color race register. Christian 19 of the marijuana law use grace to the USPT classified of the party of the PMC. Brand law according to the communication to the industry comments, not the ability to mark against the actual use of expensive one by one price of litigation, the different Russian by the different state marks the resource origin and more common there the likely to state origin whether this expense funds from the considering personal force are to be the internet to kind of visit all to one. Federal like because they and this is not clear but the have to be a result of already large branch. Kind of because the example of illegal nature kind of the head start comes in importance a lot of it. For back into registration dates and feedback is another registration into the report. People third party registration board prohibition about this including and the friends of opting or which that are all about politics. We're not going forward for it. So it's that
overreach. State compliance. Insulation. Sorry, pardon?
Kick all of it on no impact takes out the impact of the consortium because the impact is advantage one. We're not going for overreach advantage. Trump does not undermine disease prevention. No warning. The 2 NCR telling about drug supplies, which is to say, yes, pandemic sponsorization. By class of society, Indian objective change, engineering of the stratosphere, cognitive class of society, which are all external impacts, but also it causes the infection of all humans, which is the only one. And they have defense too, that's bomb. No other warrants for global here. Their evidence is empirical. While ours is predicted, disease are rapidly evolving and mutating now, which takes out their defense. So interagency cooperation spreads intelligent cooperation necessary to solve all existential threats. Now, the climate change, AI, asteroids, emerging tech, etc., are nebula accident as a parsar, which means that solves the impact of the counterpart PTO cooperation, so it solves for broader interagency cooperation, allowing until operations to occur, which solves their only defense here. State compliance counterplan. They drop the warming defense, which means there's no impact to it. And first is backward, bad projections. Climate also are unreliable. So complex and variables are too wide ranging to include extinction, IPCC, and UN both abandoned the reports because they're wild and exaggerated localized hotspots. Second is its gradual guaranteeing adaptation to irreversible changes. Humans survive multiple worst case scenarios. And so even if it's bad, it's not a station that's a 2AC bulkhead. No spillover for this counterplan. There are no evidence that says deference to a small trade to a small issue in trademarks would be a much broader. There are evidence that all defines what cooperative federalism looks like. In the abstract, there are none of them signals that the counterplan would solve for that warming response that they need to solve for the counterplan is not benefit. Permutation due to plan. When the further states in all other instances texture splash because it's not texture intrinsic. And it solves that benefit because there's no reason that IPSD would defer. Over every single other climate legislation law which solves for net benefit the counterplan much better than they do. It's also not functionally intrinsic. That's why it's less than the counterplan by still leaving out a specific area of law use and never gave a warrant for intrinsic. If the counterplan must be textually functionally better, this permutation legitimate and then for benefits to education. And the background eventually only makes one US or plus counterplans. Competitive cost English rates for recycled infinite fixed out function, and we progress to overcrowded generics with artificial net benefits that are about no ground loss. First they get content the block. Actually, they don't get counted, but they get the box means counterplans and these counterplans. Second is process counterplans, which mean this has solve artificial net benefits are key. Third is make ground high, key generous cafe. Court cloud rips up the topic, no word scramble, terminations. The text must follow the counterplan text order, but word gains are good. The whole point of the day is to perfect rhetoric. And both counterplans takes the same center as 22 plain text. It's also solved by better text writing. Logic is wrong, there's no impact to it. Ground research always that way, but puts the cardboard before divorce, consumes the counterplans. Or opportunity costs, maybe they are, but only with smart text writing. Voting for non-germane counterplans is watchable. Real world is not real world. Policymakers don't have over function, but they do matter semantic differences in worlds. It's not real world. And because it's not germane, no presumption durable fiat solves for this argument. The text in the perm is incoherent. Vagueness does not have an impact. But the perm solves much better because it gives the states more broad authority than the counterplan, doing what their cards advocate for. But also, the plan solves the net benefit independently by removing the law of use requirement, which refer to states in that area, which solves the whole net benefit. But anyway, the counterplan cannot solve the case. The law of use requirement in place, which allows the PTOs to apply wherever they want. That ensures complete overreach. And specifically opens up backdoors for litigation of the NDCA. That's Nico's only complete removal solves the counterplan. Doesn't access it for it's only about marijuana trademarks. That means law of use standard applies to every area, specifically all over drugs in the NDCA. Second, the highlight says nothing is one example of DNG policy about, but there are others that violate. That's also great. I'll go to consortium. I'll go back up. Perm to both, it solves the net benefit because owners will apply for the uniform trademark for their uniform trademark courts with better arbitration, which prevents court fraud from occurring because it goes to a different court system. But the counterplan cannot solve the case because it does not solve PTO overreach because it does not place any status on them, which is sustained deficits for the other counterplan, which means it cannot solve advantage to one error is incoherent here. They have no external impact to court fraud. But the only impact was the first advantage, which we have conceded on impact this. But there's no the litigation is wrong, it's already high now. There's no one trolls are litigating like crazy because they can easily infringe since there's no protection. But the asshole are running registration against trolls who are counting across state lines. That's garbage. State compliance company. Condo's back kicking the argument and tell me that's a litigation first asking public race conservation. Measuring and obvious impossible to get to ACD practice for mistaken. Please that over branch this reports the target research answer shape from the United States Shield, which award will read the honor interpretation is given by the interpreted education is solved by this watching this have an impact. But conduct is watchable to screw and was wrong shape and solve no diminishing utilities, markings of wood cross applications and things installed by this cameras in case the very service beyond this have patent a bad election policy. And she breathed to her step that was above the other. During which is identified, Schumer said is too late to come back. Reject the team is about otherwise it becomes the cost options. Digital labs kicking ass these are firms are theory which means to define this solves their office, which is above logic was also above does have an impact for firms. It's wrong because they confirm use singular pains.
Classify deficit to control.
Yeah, I can also find the deficit to consortium. So both the deficit is found over.
It's fine.
5-car plan. Um. Advantage and then. Yeah, fantastic job. Beauty countries specific framing long with a risk of being a benefit and a risk of solvency for the second advantage. We should defer to us and go a negative first, and obviously disproving the term as well. First, I'll explain solvency very first. It's due to lawful use of our state. With legalized marijuana can decide to remove the lawful use exemption on a federal level for people in their state. That definitely solves. They dropped the terms the marijuana even if they can see the marijuana it just doesn't solve because it definitely solves PTO overreach for two reasons. First, it's mitigated off the DOJ wanting to defer to state policy. That's what it says in the guard by refusing registration of marks used by state marijuana. PTO undermine premise of the DOJ policy. They haven't listed any other agencies other than that. So you should think it's new on the 2AR, but the only agency that matters is the DOJ, which means we have some solvency for the PTO advantage. We also have solvency for the PTO advantage because they would still be enforcing what the states want and following state compliance because the PTO is enforcing federal trademarks. They just defer to what the states would legalize we want to do first. So it still solves the second advantage. They also dropped the term as evidence that only covered in federal system can regulate marijuana and federal overreach tax the industry independent. This is independent of offense against currently other issues because they're still doing the lawful use requirement in the remote warming and also it solves warming because federal state partnerships are key to solve climate change first flexibility innovation between federal state governments. That's what it is. And we extend the impact here, so I'll extend it again, not linear testing impact speed of specific points, but sure, extension warming certainly warming and exceed the adaptability limit ensuring extension. I didn't hear a warn as to why warming wasn't true in the 1 year, so they give it to them and you at least have to have a time on the extension of what that card said in order to get it. Otherwise, you should defer to us because it's not like we didn't extend the name card in the 2C. Next is the spillover stuff. That was the top, but they dropped our evidence that they called it 20 in the Roberts 15 bed saying that that modern federalism state and national governments they share responsibility and that if we shift resources for certain things like warming that would obviously spill over more broadly. Only we have evidence on this question, so you should default to the negative and you should give us some risk here. Okay, so to give some risk here, that's the Covenant 20 evidence, and it said that specifically that across domains, that means even small trademark law that we should save off federal intervention that would bolster the states and that would cause us spillover for them to do what they want to warning. Next is from the other government obviously functionally intrinsic because it's had the function of deterring to the states for every other policy, adding the different other policies that function neither is counterplay nor the app, which appears as functionally intrinsic, even the counterplay deferred to they just other lawful uses, not other issues. The second term is also functionally intrinsic in terms of the states and trademarks, but not lawful use, like trademarks for cyber e-commerce, etc., which are not in the counterplay function. The counterplay is one function, not a series of discrete ones that can permute. That's infinitely regressive and logical personal competition, but functional introduces bad hours, all outcomes, one in mixed integration. Their model classes to know that getting the most terrain of the non-competitive CCTV ideas on atoms ideally arbitrary words for new advantage styles are necessary in any community. Start breaking tiny apps that generate nation genes is a structural incentive to limit the plan. Let's text with those that not or don't go to war with China with zeros and ground, but also translation because it's bad model for operation too. Logic play caramels with the words nuclear alone measure express that's all like opposite zero. You need to sound because you have to reduce stress forces while maintaining nuclear arsenal. Also impossible to right hand the plane without negative water and neck ground at ways back. Apple the topic is joking, seeing their politically fading and no countries to weapon system apps and are on the right side of the debate. There's no zero needing that exists for those Apple truths next office, like I said on Netflix that data. Couple with big plans and thinking to sandbagging to our recently biased overcorrect to keep the neck of the game. And state education only aren't to preserve education. You don't believe our model is the best for education. There's definitely worse. Apology here, the apology of their model justified just getting out of justified permuting it. Takes fixes wrong and lose with the no fixing. There's no function competitive. It's not a function of the playing game. Sure, defendant. You just counterplay. You just have to also dropping the issue. Not just playing against non-competitive. Choose a counterplay. Lose the theory. You know, it's all ground. Because they can still unscrambled firms, and there's no groundhog, it's zero, and there's no uniqueness in ideas down to zero, like the uniqueness, and drop that they're intro expanding the plan impossible one, and from zero to finish plan justifies the truth, and shows the athlete should prepare the details of the plan's key to their advantages, and they find out ways to always find a way of working good, right, takes better, which, takes all unscrambled firms, the number of words the plan is spectral, infinitely large, we can't, that there's just no worse, because our writing is not started, because then I can't predict all of it, but all of it is gone, and the capital is not an opportunity cost, or the real word at, and the no presumption, so I explain the counterpoint, solvency, below stuff over here, so it doesn't matter, I explained that at the top, next is, no. Dropping in the next leg, so our ground is reactive across like everything from this up here. They say fairness that ways, but no, they drop the D's and turns and add 2 error collapse all, so that next to fairness also next looks that way because they drop that all of our impact here. We have because they don't, there's no logic impact, it's definitely so this is all any lessons with force from their power because they still they make us zero sum next arguments and also because this next ground they still don't have any of things, so you should overcorrect and default to next lesson and it takes time reasonability and they didn't answer and we are reasonable, we didn't run that benchmark plan, so over here.
Even the Baker often sees as a highly mitigated economic impact on the continent is outweighed by a huge risk of facing a deficit. Disease causing extinction, dropped out of the 2R with no aims to communication post-COVID are likely and highly lethal because of globalization and animal interaction that allow them to overcome all subsequent infections. Two routes, one infection alone goes like a person because it becomes me so lethal that it's spread to everyone with guaranteed fatality, wiping out the population. Two knock-on effects, disease cause societal collapse or reach extinction. They cut off those supply chains that have critical life. Then reverse engineering efforts which creates a double catastrophe as climate accelerates rapidly. That's bomb. Defense was never known to give the 2 and R, so you give it 100% magnitude and probability, which means any risk of deficit is efficient to automatically vote out. No, not only count those specifically. Continue climate defense stated for added to it. So you do not give them 2 and R. The answer is basically they can continue to vote on a guaranteed solvency for the current because any risk of triggering the net benefit is irrelevant, or you can just vote on a small risk of the deficit outweighing because the kind of fund can never reach extinction. There's no warming impact to one in bad projection. The climate modeling is completely unreliable. No one's been able to completely predict it. They don't always answer reversing a few years later. There's too many complex variables that they can never predict for. And then whenever they conclude extinction, it's wrong every single time. The IPCC and the UN both demanded their reports because they concluded they were unreliable, which is what their evidence relies on, which means you should scratch off your globe because our evidence indicts it too. It's gradual, no matter what, comment whatever, be non-linear enough to overcome the entirety of communities that best do it, adapt, because we'll always adapt to it in the long term, and never allow it to go to compensation. Humans survive every single risk in the past, no reason they won't survive. Climate change, that's a fucking evidence. I'm never too much, just with much attention chapter on non-linearity, but that's not a warrant for why it becomes our defense. You have a high risk, you have a low threshold for our defense. Now, in winning that means any risk of deficit, it's sufficient vote app. The kind of cannot solve the PTO operation advantage. And the only removal of the lawful use standard completely insufficient to solve. The lawful use standard allows the PTO to intervene in every other agency's comfort zone of enforcing the laws for them. That includes DOJ marijuana law, but it's not stopped there. The second edition isolates PTO enforcement on the FDA's authority by opening up a back door for tons and tons of litigation under the FTCA for companies to claim drugs are invalid because of the lawful use standard. That's because the array of evidence the counterclaim cannot possibly solve this one. They only write solvency for marijuana in DOJ policy. Even if you give them that access is zero of the FTCA scenario, which is only what we're going for. Two, to throw a state lawful use standards on the FTCA is incoherent. The states have no standards over the FTCA because it's exclusively a federal law. Part two is they can solve this, and logic agrees at hand. The reason the counterclaim could solve for marijuana is because the federal government has given the states lots of control over marijuana law, but they have given them zero control of the FTCA. That's Miko's and Rave evidence, which means you cannot give them any access to the scenario. Even if you think there is a risk of solvency, they have not explained it in the context of the FTCA. So you shouldn't do the work for them because we have a high estimation of what multiple evidence for why only complete removal from the local use standard solves. The impact of that is that companies can still sue drug manufacturers under the FTCA for violating the lawful use standard, which casts them in a flood of litigation as companies keep on litigating to gain money from them, making drug production impossible. That limits disease response because they're never getting enough drugs to respond to disease and shortages ensure that we cannot respond to pandemic outbreaks. That's more evidence that any risk means you automatically go to that because we have a high risk of an impact and real risk of the net benefit counterclaim. Now, even if you don't think of that as sufficient, primary use solves any offense that they might garner off of it. It as Congress remove the lawful use requirement of the coverage of birds of the states in every possible instance, which includes climate regulation, solving the net benefit without the need for any spillover. That solves the net benefit much better, but skipping over the intermediary steps. The corner did not contest policy to winning legitimacy should be an ad ballot. Intrinsic is zero. Text was biased for proofs. It's not technically intrinsic, but it's not functionally intrinsic either. The choice did not give a warrant for affirming intrinsicness. So the corner is too late breaking. You should strike it off your vote. Read the counterclaim text as two functions. The first is deferral. The second is the limitation of word deferral will exist. The parent removes a bunch of specification from the counterclaim text. So it doesn't specify the area to apply. It does not add the function of the deference to other policies because the deference function was included in the 1C counterclaim. Don't read the counterclaim as one function. Every counterclaim has more than one thing to do, and this one does it too. But even if they win it, it's intrinsic. But that's good. Even that's good. But we should still get the parent because counterclaims let's compete technically and functionally, and that's best for background functional interpretation. Because yeah, assuming down to the worst counterclaims like board funding less than cost garbage because they're functionally competitive now because the employees control, recommend, direct, etc. That are possibly because there are zero tests to them and they have a minute detail. Then you got garner net benefit off them, but we can never answer to. The 2 hours good on their offense did not have an ongoing answer to wars. For instance, the key impact debate is competitive activity that requires a very minimum Woodward to at least our ability to win. They don't access net guard. There are plenty of econ politics and econ politics things because IB tech economy and big tech dominance policies. Switching ourselves every access that doesn't have an IB guard keyword. And calculate dominance policy of the property was which gives you net guard every single time. We'll also see the economy which checks all net guard. Which checks all net guard and gives you flexibility. Logic is wrong. One ground of which you should have press all background for the sake of logical interpretation. Two is logical to vote on a non-germane kind of a logical policy maker use it easily to vote. Then nobody's why this counterclaims good for debate in the first place. Education is wrong. The 2 did not assign an impact to it. Furnace out waste can quote without a arena, which ends the educational benefits of the action of the analyst. Further topic is worse than recycle process of everything around. Team go for conditions, control, unpopular journalism, under interpretation, which is the worst of the worst.
Yeah. think that they've been solidly dedicated to the overreach advantage, specifically in the FDCA scenario. You've made some arguments about why you access overreach because of the like DoD alignment argument, but I don't know why that would solve the FDCA stuff, like in terms of that, like that internally seems to be distinct from the DOJ one. Also the FDCA doesn't, the use of unlawful use to circumvent FDCA rules, I guess, or the enforcement doesn't seem to involve a state law, right? Like, so it's not that, so even if you were to win the like spillover uncooperative federal or cooperative federal and stuff that you spill over to other areas, I don't know that it would resolve the issue of the unlawful use being used to stifle FDCA enforcement things. So I don't think you get access to disease impact, and then there's like